Never looked at her, not once in 14 months, not until the night a stranger in a gray suit made her laugh across a crowded room, and the most controlled man in Montreal forgot, for the first time in his adult life, how to look away. Maybe you know what that feels like, to show up every day, and do the work and do it well, and still be the one person in the room that nobody quite sees. To be competent and quiet and careful, and to discover that those are not qualities that get you noticed. They are qualities that make you invisible. This story begins in a city that knows how to keep secrets. Montreal in November. The old stone buildings along St. Jacques with frost curling at the window ledges, the kind of cold that settles in the bones before it settles in the air. A woman at a desk on the 32nd floor of a building that did not advertise what happened inside it. A man in the corner office whose name meant different things to different people, depending on which side of the city they lived on. And one evening at a gala neither of them wanted to attend. A laugh that changed everything. Margot Tessier arrived at work at 7:58 every morning, which was 2 minutes before her official start time and 40 minutes before anyone else on the floor appeared. She liked those 40 minutes. She liked the building when it belonged to silence. The hum of the elevator bank, the particular quality of light that came through the east-facing windows before the sun had fully risen above the financial district. The coffee she made in those minutes tasted better than any other coffee she made all day, though she could not have explained why. She was 26 and careful in the particular way that women who have been made to feel like a disruption learn to be. Small movements, a voice pitched to the lower end of its natural register. Clothes that were neat without announcing themselves. She wore her dark hair pulled back at the nape every day, not because she preferred it that way, but because she had learned early that appearing put together was a form of armor, and she needed armor for this particular job. Her desk sat outside the private office of of Séverin Vance. She had to be careful about that, about confusing the man in her head with the man across the desk. It had been a habit she developed sometime around month 4, around the time she stopped pretending she was not paying attention and admitted to herself, in the quiet of her own apartment on Rue Beaubien, that she had started paying far too much attention indeed. 14 months. She had worked for Séverin Vance for 14 months. In that time she had learned his schedule the way you learn a language you are never supposed to speak out loud, through repetition, through context, through the accumulation of small moments that no one thought to guard, because no one had thought she was listening. She knew that he took his coffee black unless he had been on a call with the Paris office before 8, in which case he drank nothing until 10. She knew that the slight pause before he entered a boardroom was not hesitation but calibration. She knew the difference between the silence he wore when he was thinking and the silence he wore when he had already decided and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. She knew, too, the exact moment she had stopped thinking of him as her employer. It had been in early spring, month 5, when she had gone down to the lobby to collect a package and found a woman standing near the security desk holding a child who would not stop crying. The child was 3 or 4 years old, and the woman looked like she had been apologizing for him to strangers for the better part of an hour. She was shaking. The child was shaking. Everyone in the lobby was doing the careful thing that people do in public, looking in the general direction of distress and choosing not to intervene. Séverin Vance walked through the lobby at that moment on his way back from a lunch she had been told to reschedule twice. He stopped. He did not look around to see whether anyone was watching him stop. He crossed to the woman, said something low enough that Margot could not hear it from across the lobby, and when the woman shook her head and the child cried harder, he sat down on the marble bench against the wall and spoke directly to the child. No performance, no self-consciousness, just a large, controlled man making himself small so that a frightened child could feel the size of the room. The child stopped crying in under 2 minutes. Séverin stood, said something to the security desk, and walked to the private elevator without waiting to be thanked. He had 2 people at his side and a phone at his ear before the elevator closed. Margot stood near the package desk with the parcel she had come to collect and understood that she was in serious trouble. After that, she noticed too much. She noticed that he never used his influence to make situations smaller for himself at someone else's expense. She noticed the way he listened in meetings, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually absorbing what was said, which was rarer than it ought to have been at that level. She noticed that he was feared but not cruel about it, which was a distinction that mattered more than most people in his world seemed to understand. She told no one. She was 26 with a lease she could barely afford, and a mother, in Trois-Rivières, who had worked herself to a different kind of exhaustion and did not need her daughter's impossible feelings as additional weight. So Margot kept the feeling where she kept most things: quiet, organized, completely out of view. She was very good at being out of view. The Levesque Foundation Gala was held on the last Friday of November at a hotel on Sherbrooke that smelled like old money and cut flowers. Margot had organized the logistics, table assignments, driver schedules, the list of names requiring discreet handling at the door. Her job did not require her to attend, but at 5:15 on the afternoon of the gala, his assistant, herself, she was his assistant, received a message from Mason, his head of security, indicating that the senior coordinator was expected on site. She had 40 minutes to go home, change, and come back. She wore the one good dress she owned, a deep green thing she had bought on sale 2 years ago for a wedding she ended up not attending. It fit the way clothes from a different period of your life fit. Not wrong, but carrying the ghost of who you were when you bought it. She pinned her hair up, put on the small pearl earrings her grandmother had left her, and took the metro because there was no time to find parking. She arrived looking like she had not just run across the city. The room was full of the kind of people for whom rooms like this were entirely ordinary: foundation board members, city councilors, 3 people she recognized from the evening news, several more she recognized only from the briefing notes she had prepared. She found Mason near the bar, confirmed that the table cards had been reorganized per the last-minute request, and settled into the routine of being invisible in a room full of people who needed things. That was when she saw him. Not Séverin. She had seen Séverin within 30 seconds of arriving. He was the kind of presence you located automatically in any room, the way your eye finds the horizon. No, the person she saw now was a man she did not know. Tall, sandy-haired, American-accented when he spoke, the sort of easy confidence that came from never having had to earn a room's goodwill. He was standing near the bar, and he was looking at her. His name, she would learn later, was Court Bellamy. He was a property consultant from Toronto, and he had absolutely nothing to do with Séverin Vance's world beyond an introduction at a mutual client's dinner. He had nothing to do with any of it. He was simply a man who saw a woman in a green dress standing alone at a foundation gala and walked over. "You look like someone who's been working since 6 this morning," he said. Margot looked at him. "7, she said. He laughed. So did she. It was not a spectacular laugh. It was not even a particularly long one. It was the laugh of someone who has been professional and contained for 12 consecutive hours and suddenly finds, with no warning, that someone is being simply kind. The kind of laugh that surprises even the person laughing. Across the room, at the far end of the main table, Séverin Vance looked up. He had been speaking to the foundation chair, a woman named Odette Brulé, whose donations kept 3 community organizations operational on the east end of the island. He had been listening with the careful attention he brought to everything. But the moment the laugh reached him, he stopped. Not visibly. Anyone watching would have seen nothing change. But his eyes moved. They moved to Margot Tessier, standing with a consultant from Toronto, with her head tipped back and her shoulders relaxed in a way he had never once seen at the office. Something passed through him, not a soft thing. Something with an edge. He returned to Odette Brulé. He said the appropriate words. He did not look at Margot again for the remainder of the evening, but later, in the car back to his building on Avenue du Parc, he sat with his phone face down on the seat beside him and looked out the window at the city moving past in the rain and thought about the fact that he had heard her laugh 3 times in 14 months. 3 times in 14 months, and he could not have told you when any of those 3 times had occurred. He simply knew the number. The way you know sometimes that a song you have heard 100 times has always had a lyric you were not listening to. He sat with that for the entire drive and said nothing. On Monday morning, Margot arrived at the office at 7:58 and found that her desk had been moved. not removed. Moved. The desk that had sat in the corridor outside Séverin Vance's office for 14 months. With the brass lamp she had brought from home and the small cactus she had named Carl without telling anyone, was now inside the office, against the interior wall, positioned at an angle to his primary desk, close enough that when she sat at one, and he sat at the other, they would be separated by perhaps 4 feet of space. Carl the cactus had been relocated to the inner corner of the windowsill. She stood in the doorway for a full 6 seconds before the floor manager appeared behind her with the expression of a man delivering a message someone else had composed. "Mr. Vance has requested that your station be moved inside his office," he said, which was the most passive construction she had ever heard used to describe something this aggressively deliberate. She walked in. She set her bag down. She looked at the cactus, which had been placed near the window in a spot with better light than it had ever had in the corridor. Then she looked at Séverin Vance, who was already at his desk, jacket on, already reading, who looked up with the equanimity of a man who had decided something and found the decision entirely unremarkable. "Good morning," he said. "You moved my desk," she said. "Yes." She waited. He returned to the document on his desk. "Mr. Vance." He looked up again. "Why?" He held her gaze with that particular steadiness of his, the kind that made other people feel like their questions were smaller than they had seemed. "Because I wanted you in here," he said. Margot let a beat of silence pass. "That is not a reason." "It is to me." She opened her mouth, closed it, and sat down. The chair was new. It had lumbar support. Her old one had not. People talked. Of course they talked. She felt it all morning in the changed quality of how quickly doors opened and how long people lingered at the threshold. She felt it in the way her inbox shifted. Colleagues who had always emailed her directly now CC'd an additional name, as if uncertain what protocol applied to her anymore. Séverin answered 2 questions she had not asked him by noon. Both times he did it without looking up from whatever he was reading, as if her unspoken concerns were audible. The 3rd time she was quiet for too long, he looked over. "You're angry," he said. "You moved my desk and apparently changed my job function without discussing either one with me," she said. "I don't know what I am." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite softened. Adjusted. "You are exactly what you were," he said, closer. The word sat between them with a weight it shouldn't have had in an office conversation. She looked at her screen. "I need to send 12 calendar updates." "Send them." "People are going to have questions I don't know how to answer. Tell them to bring their questions to me." Margot pressed the heel of her hand briefly to her forehead, then started typing. After a moment she said, without looking up, "You could have asked." He was quiet long enough that she thought he would not answer. Then, "I was afraid you would say no." She looked up. That was not the answer she had expected. Not from him. Not from a man whose relationship to the word no seemed to consist entirely of saying it to other people. He was reading again. Or pretending to. She looked back at her screen. Something in her chest had rearranged itself, and she was not sure she could put it back. 3 weeks later, someone took a photograph of her leaving her apartment on Rue Beaubien. She did not know about it immediately. She learned about it from Mason, who appeared in the office on a Tuesday afternoon with a closed expression and a plain white envelope that he set on Séverin's desk without speaking. Séverin opened it. She saw his face change in the single most unguarded moment she had witnessed in 14 months. Every line of him went rigid, then still in the particular way that men go still when they are substituting control for something they cannot afford to feel in front of other people. He turned the photograph face down without letting her see it. "What is it?" she asked. He looked at Mason, closed the privacy glass. The frosted panel slid across the interior windows, sealing the 3 of them from the floor outside. Montreal blurred behind smoked glass. Towers and winter sky and the faint gray suggestion of the mountain. "There's a man," Mason said, "who's been asking questions. Building directory. Your schedule." He looked at her briefly, then back at Séverin. "Whether you have a regular route home." The blood in her face did something complicated. She was aware of it distantly, the way you are aware of weather changing. Could be nothing, she said. Both men looked at her. It is not nothing, Séverin said. His voice was quiet. She had learned enough by now to know that the quieter it got, the more certain he was. He turned the photograph over. It was her, 3 weeks ago, gray wool coat, hair loose because it had been a Saturday, and she had let herself be a person for a day. She was walking out of her building with a coffee in one hand and her keys in the other. The photo had been taken from across the street. The resolution was precise enough to read the name on her travel mug. She sat down. How long? She asked carefully. Have they been watching? I don't know yet. He came around the desk and crouched in front of her chair in a movement so completely at odds with everything she knew about how he occupied space that she forgot for a moment what they were talking about. Look at me, he said. She did. There is a man named Renaud Gilles. He runs freight contracts through the port at Montreal Est. Legitimate on paper, not in practice. He has spent 3 years trying to find leverage he can use against me. He paused. He has apparently decided to look for it in a different direction. Margot absorbed this with the focused stillness of someone doing their best not to shake. Through me. Yes. Because, he noticed, Séverin said, that you matter to me. The office went very quiet. She looked at him, kneeling in front of her chair with his expensive suit and his controlled face, and the photograph still lying on the desk behind him, and she tried to find a shape for what she was feeling that fit inside a normal-sized sentence. I have worked for you for 14 months, she said. I know. You have said good morning to me on approximately 40% of those mornings. Something moved in his jaw. I know that too. When, exactly? Her voice caught. She did not let it stop. When did I start mattering? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, the night I heard you laugh with someone who wasn't me. The room seemed to shrink. I spent 14 months keeping distance, he said. I thought it was protection. I thought. He exhaled. I was wrong about what I was protecting. She shook her head. Not disagreement, just the effort of absorbing all of it while the city dissolved to gray shapes outside the frosted glass. What happens now? He stood. He picked up the photograph and turned it face down again with the same deliberate care he brought to everything. You don't go home tonight, he said. She opened her mouth. Not a request, he said. Not a punishment. There are 2 things I can guarantee you. This building and my address on Outremont. Until I know how many people have seen that photograph and where it has been, I cannot guarantee Rue Beaubien. She looked at him. He looked back. She thought about the radiator in her apartment that made a sound like a small argument every night between midnight and 2. She thought about her grandmother's earrings and the dish on her dresser. She thought about how a year and 2 months of watching this man from across a desk had not prepared her for the version of him that was currently asking her to uproot her entire life in the middle of a Tuesday. I have plants, she said. I'll have them brought. They're not. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. They're not a metaphor. They're actual plants. I have 4 of them. 4 plants, he said. I'll send someone I don't know, someone I trust. She dropped her hands. He was watching her with that absolute steadiness of his, and underneath it, just barely, the kind of tension that had no professional name. One night, she said, we'll discuss it tomorrow. She should have pushed back harder than she did. His address on Outremont was a limestone house set back from a quiet street behind bare November trees. Not what she had expected, which was a penthouse of some kind, glass and clean lines and deliberate grandeur. Instead, high ceilings, old wood floors, walls of books that looked red rather than decorative. A kitchen that opened into a garden, now brown and frost-covered, and somehow still entirely alive in its winter form. She stood in the front hall with her overnight bag and looked at it all. You live here, she said. I do. It's. She searched for the word. It's a home. He said nothing. But the way he said nothing was different from the way he usually said nothing. She slept in a guest room on the 2nd floor that smelled faintly of lavender and had a window that looked into the garden. Someone had brought the 4 plants from her apartment and arranged them along the windowsill in order of height, which was not how she kept them, and which somehow made her want to cry for reasons she couldn't fully account for. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around her and thought about what it meant to matter to someone who had never once told you that you did. At some point in the early hours, she woke to the sound of his voice from the floor below. Not arguing, not threatening, just speaking in the particular register of a man who has called in something that cannot be called back. One sentence reached her through the floors in the quiet. "If anyone touches her," Séverin Vance said, "I will personally make sure that every contract Renaud Gilles has ever signed becomes unenforceable by morning." She lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling and thought, "I have been in love with this man for 9 months, and he has been doing this all along." She slept. In the morning he was already in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a file open and a coffee going cold beside it, sleeves rolled, looking like a man who had not slept and had decided this was not important enough to mention. He looked up when she came in. "There's coffee," he said. "I can see that. You slept. Some." He watched her cross to the counter and pour herself a cup, and she could feel the weight of his attention in a way she had always felt it across an office. But that felt different inside a kitchen with morning light coming through old glass. "They found the photographer," he said. "He's not local. He was brought in from outside the province, which tells me Renaud's operation has expanded since the last time we mapped it." Margot wrapped both hands around the mug. "I heard you last night." He went still. "The phone call," she said. I wasn't trying to. I just woke up." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed the file. "You should be angry with me," he said. "Should I? I kept distance from you for 14 months while you were working 6 feet from my office, because I knew what my world looked like when it decided someone was useful to it. I told myself that was protection." He paused. "It was cowardice. And it didn't work. All it meant was that when Renaud's people started looking, I wasn't positioned to stop them fast enough." Margot set her mug down. "You're telling me you stayed away from me to protect me?" "Yes. And now I'm standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning because that plan failed." "Yes." His expression did not change. "Do you want me to apologize?" She considered this with genuine seriousness. "No," she said. "I want you to be honest about what this is." The kitchen held its breath. "I don't entirely know what it is yet," he said. "But I know that I spent 3 weeks after the gala trying to forget the sound of you laughing at something that had nothing to do with me. And I couldn't do it. And I know that when Mason showed me that photograph yesterday, I felt something I don't have a controlled word for." He looked at her steadily. "That is as honest as I know how to be at 7 in the morning." Margot picked up her coffee again. "That's the most words I've heard you say that weren't about a contract or a schedule," she said. "Yes, well." Something almost sheepish crossed his face. It was so completely unlike him that she laughed. The laugh was the same one from the gala. The surprised one, the one that happened before she could decide whether it was appropriate. He looked at her when she laughed, and his face did something she had not seen it do in 14 months. It opened. 2 nights later, someone broke a window on the ground floor of the Outremont house. It was not a random break-in. The sound came at 1:40 in the morning, a deliberate crack rather than a crash, the sound of a single pane giving way with precision rather than force. Margot was awake before she had processed what she'd heard. She sat up in the dark guest room and listened. Below her, she heard movement, then voices. Then Séverin's voice in a register she had not heard before, lower and harder and carrying the cold authority of a man who had needed this particular voice at some point in his life and had never entirely stopped needing it. She found him in the front hallway with Mason and 2 men she did not know, all of them looking at a door that had been relocked and a section of side window that had been covered with something opaque. No one was injured. The intruder, one, Mason confirmed, not multiple, had not made it past the ground floor alarm trigger. Séverin turned when she came down the stairs. In the half-dark of the hallway, she saw something cross his face before he controlled it. The kind of thing a face does when the most important concern in a serious situation is immediately reprioritized upon the arrival of one particular person. "You're all right," he said. "I heard the window." "I know. I'm sorry." She came the rest of the way down the stairs. Mason and his people had moved to the side corridor, giving them the hallway. It was deliberate, she understood. The men in Séverin Vance's world understood what it looked like when their employer needed a room. "What happened?" she asked. Renaud escalated. His voice was steady, but she could see the edge of something beneath it. Not fear, something angrier and more private than that. He sent one man, a probe, to see how well the property is watched. And now he knows. She looked at him in the dim light of the hallway. He was wearing a dark sweater and jeans, which was the most casual she had ever seen him, and his hair was not entirely in order, which was a detail so minor it should not have registered, and that she would remember for a very long time. "Come here," he said. She crossed the remaining space between them. He put both hands on her face, not possessively, not with urgency, just holding her face between his palms in the particular way that people do when they are confirming that something is real and still intact. "I should not have brought you here if I wasn't certain this address was secure," he said. "That was a failure in judgment. I'm going to tell you that directly. You told me you could guarantee it. I was wrong." She looked at him. The admission cost him something. She could see the exact place where his control tightened over the moment. "Are we safe now?" she asked. "Yes." "Truly?" "Yes," he exhaled. "Mason has contacted 2 people who will ensure that Renaud Gilles spends the next several days reconsidering every current arrangement he has in this province. The message has been sent. This won't be repeated." She believed him, not because she was naive about what that meant, but because she had watched this man operate at a distance for over a year, and she understood, with a clarity she could not have articulated neatly, the difference between a threat and a fact. "Okay," she said. He kept looking at her. "I am going to tell you something," he said. She waited. "I have been careful about you since month 2. Since I realized that you were the only person in my professional life who saw me accurately and chose, for reasons I couldn't account for, not to use it. That kind of attention is rare in my position, and dangerous." A pause. "I convinced myself that staying distant was the right calculation, that it kept you protected. Séverin, let me finish." His thumbs were still at her temples, barely moving. "Last night, when I got the call that someone had been asking questions about your address, the thing I felt was not strategic. It was not calculated. It was—" He stopped, started again. "I have spent 20 years making sure that nothing I felt was louder than what I decided, and in approximately 4 seconds when Mason said your name, that stopped working." The hallway was very still. "I don't know exactly what to do with you," he said. "That is also the most honest thing I can say." Margot reached up and covered his hands with hers. His knuckles were cold from the opened window. "I have been in love with you," she said, "since you sat on a marble bench in a lobby and talked a 3-year-old into stopping crying." He went completely still. "Month 5, she said. "March." I was picking up a package. He looked at her like someone trying to convert a number they did not expect into a unit of measurement they recognize. "That long," he said. "That long." Something shifted in him. Structural almost. The way a building settles when a thing that was load-bearing is replaced with something solid. He kissed her. It was not tentative. It was not careful. It was the kiss of a man who has been careful for a very long time about a very specific thing, and has decided, in the hallway of his own house at 2 in the morning with a broken window behind them, and a city full of consequential people who would be receiving calls in the next hour, that he is done being careful about this particular thing. She kissed him back in the same spirit. The meeting happened a week later in a private room above a restaurant on Rue Saint-Denis that did not appear in any public directory. Dark walls, a single long table, men who carried weight in forms that did not always have legal names. Margot sat beside Séverin Vance, not behind him, not near the door, beside him. The room understood what that meant before he said a word. When he spoke, he said her name first. Margot Tessier. He said what she was to him in language that was simple and left no interpretive room. He said what it would mean to any person in any room connected to his name to direct any form of attention toward her. He said it quietly, in the way he said all serious things, without emphasis, without performance, with the complete certainty of someone who knows exactly how much weight a sentence can carry before it needs to be loud. He held her hand on the table the entire time. Afterward, on the stairs, she said, "You didn't have to do that publicly." He stopped on the landing and looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I did." She thought about asking him to explain. Then she thought about 14 months of good mornings that had passed her desk like weather, and the way a photograph of her in a gray wool coat had changed the shape of his face, and a hallway in the middle of the night and hands on her face to confirm she was real. She didn't ask him to explain. She went back to the desk inside his office. She had not, in the end, ever really left it. People on the floor had learned to recalibrate. The ones who recalibrated with grace remained. The ones who did not found themselves working on other floors, in other buildings with no particular fanfare around the transition. Margot kept Carl the cactus on the windowsill with the better light. She kept the brass lamp she had brought from home. She started drinking her coffee at the small table near the window instead of at her desk, because the window faced east and the light was better in the morning, and Séverin had, without being asked, moved the chairs so that two people could sit there if they chose. They chose most mornings. Court Bellamy from Toronto sent her a professional connection request 6 weeks after the gala. She accepted it because it seemed unkind not to, and because she had genuinely liked him, and because the interaction that had changed her entire life had originated in a simple and innocent kindness, and she thought it deserved acknowledgement. She showed the notification to Séverin, not because she needed permission, because she thought it would make him say something she wanted to hear. He looked at the screen for a beat. "He's in property consulting," he said. "Yes." "He laughed at something you said." "I think I laughed at something he said." Séverin looked up from the screen to her face. "I know," he said. "I remember exactly how it sounded." Margot accepted the connection request and set her phone down and looked at the man across 4 feet of office space from her. With his controlled face and his cold coffee and the particular quality of attention he had apparently been directing at her since, months too, without her knowledge, and understood with great clarity that being invisible had not been the worst thing that had ever happened to her. It had simply been what came before. Outside, Montreal moved through its winter in the way it always did, with a kind of stubborn beauty, all ice and gray stone and light off the river, a city that had always understood the value of what was kept behind closed doors. And on the 32nd floor of a building on Saint-Jacques, a woman who had spent 14 months learning to disappear had run out of reasons to keep trying.